more familiar, but not not in a positive way, and that is about mismanagement of public funds. And from time immemorial, I'm talking about since the post-independence era, we've been dealing with that problem as a continent, as a people, and we seem not to be able to find a lasting solution to it. And we want to see if young people could actually be the change makers, how we could act to fix public fund mismanagement and to help us understand uh, that topic and how we as young people could help our uh, supposedly three young people, but one of them is not going to be able to join us today. But the two that are able to join us are as competent as you can imagine. And the first person is Rinu Oduala, who is the Executive Projects Director of Connect Hub Nigeria, a platform that documents, defends, and advocates against state violence, police brutality in Nigeria. She is a human rights advocate, community organizer, and influencer focused primarily on equity, justice, humanity, and community advancements issues. She uses our Twitter handle with over 500,000 followers in actualizing this. She was nominated for Future Awards Prize for Advocacy and Activism, and she has been awarded as Woman of the Year Advocacy, Economy 2022, and she's also part of BBC Nigeria's Nigerian Women Leading the Fight for Change. So we are glad to have you with us, Rinu. And the second person is our good friend, Olufemi Ogunjobi, who is currently the Career Guidance and Mentorship Manager of Prometheus Fellowship Program. As Students for Liberty, Femi got involved with Students for Liberty in Nigeria as a local coordinator in 2013, and through the years occupied several leadership positions in building, managing student programs, and overseeing the smooth running of SFL operations across the continent. On the heels of his volunteer experience, Femi joined the organization staff in 2017, where he served as the African Programs Advocate or Associate and African Programs Manager, managing all SFL operations. And of course, Femi has degrees from IFE and qualifications from King's College London and elsewhere. So it's a pleasure to also have you, Femi Ogunjobi. So why don't we get started? But before we get started, I'm just going to echo that you can drop your questions and comments in the Q&A box. I will be sure to ask them. You are as an integral part of this conversation as our panelists. So while we wait for Rino to appear, Femi, we were saying before we officially kick things off that it's election season in Africa, and if I'm correct, there should be about 29 elections. No, I said 29. 25 elections happening this year, and that's like half of the continent itself. We are like 53, 54 countries in Africa. If 25 of them have elections in 2023, then that's really interesting. And of course, among the powerhouses is Nigeria. But my thing is, you look at the list. You got places like South Sudan, Mozambique, Libya, I think Comoros, Zimbabwe. These are volatile countries where public fund mismanagement, corruption has been endemic. You know, the situation of South Sudan and Sudan seem to never get it right, and equally Nigeria. So I'm wondering, why is it important to have corruption or public fund mismanagement as a forerunning issue alongside security, economic progress, and human rights? Because those are three things leading the conversations as regards election in all or even most of all these African countries. So, but why should we care so much about fixing public fund mismanagement?
Thank you very much, Anova, and it's a pleasure to be on this conversation with Rinu as well. And I mean, you've asked a very, very important question, and it's coming up at a very, very important time in Africans, history, especially with elections. And what I would just want to say is the role of youth in fighting, corruption or mismanagement cannot be overstated, because the youth is a spark for which it can either burn or lighten a country. And for instance, let's take a look at, the End SARS movement. So let's take a look at the June 12th protest in Nigeria and all of that. You can see um, how much, um, how much spark, that movement created across the continent and even in the country as well. And why should we care? Why should we care about fighting corruption? Why should we care about fiscal management and all of that? Because the role of youth is indispensable. We are the drivers of the enlightenment process, and we constitute the bulk of the population. So whatever it is that we are doing must fit into this non-governmental structures, that serve as pressure points, to hold people in positions of authority into accountable, and pressure them for changing policies. And also we should understand that we're not just talking about this for talking sake. We should understand that public funds mismanagement is a violation of individual rights and hindrance to economic growth. We all are living, we are not living in, we're not living in a vacuum. We're not living in space. We're living in countries around the world, and countries are controlled by economy. So if we don't care so much about fiscal prudence, if we don't care so much about public funds management, that means we don't care so much about economic growth. We don't want the economy of the countries we live in to develop. And as as young people that we pride ourselves as the future of the continent, we have a moral obligation to advocate for and defend for individual rights, economic freedom, and as well as fiscal prudence, as well as fiscal management. And I'm still going to talk about maybe along the line of the conversation on how young people, can fight against corruption and promote fiscal management. But I just want to say that we care so much about this because it is a moral obligation to hold governments accountable. It is a moral obligation to fight corruption. It is a moral obligation to ensure that the economy is stable. And how can the economy be stable? By ensuring that there is no mismanagement of public funds, by ensuring that we hold leaders accountable. So that's just what I want to say on that for now.
Yeah, I strongly identify with that because, as you said, that we hardly the economic progress without fiscal responsibility. But I don't know, really, if you can hear us. I would like for us to have an extension of that because it seems as though we've always been talking about it and it just never happens. And we say, one, Africa's population is going to explode in the coming years, and two, young people have roles to play, and three, they are oftentimes the most populous demographic when it comes to election season. So I'm wondering if there are channels that you can identify as this is what we need to do to engage in conversation about public funds management, or these are the things we need to do, these are the people we need to vote for, or these are the kind of candidates we need to identify. I just want to identify those specifics in terms of how we as young people can be a force of change in that process. If you can hear us, Rinu, I would like for you to kindly respond to that. Otherwise, Femi, you want to take that while we wait for it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I love the way you structured the question, and it's boils down to the youth because on first of all, I would like to start off with having the right set of values. It's very, very important as youth. And by this I mean we should understand that as youth, getting rich through corrupt means it's no way to get rich. I mean, I always tell people around me, please, whatever you do, don't get your hands dirty. I understand it's election season in Nigeria, and a bulk of this population, a bulk of the youth population supports a particular candidate, and a bulk of another population, of the youth population also queue behind a particular candidate. But I know there is a right to association, rights of association, of course. But as youths, please, it's very, very important that we don't help people with questionable character to get to positions of authority. And we should value a system that, that relies so much on hard work and a track record of fiscal management. And it all boils down to values. That's one. And two, there is a place of knowledge, there's a place of education, there's a place of sensitization, there's a place of monitoring government expenditure. The youths need to know about how government funds are being spent. It is a civic responsibility. Knowledge, they say, is power. You can't fight what you don't know. There are examples of organizations that check government expenditure in Nigeria. For instance, we have budget, through their project tracker, through their civic eye project and all of that. We also have, I think, connected development, follow the money project or something like that. I mean, these are organizations that churn out tons of data on how government spends their money. How many youths, follow through this data? How many of us ask the right questions? I mean, this is our only way of reacting, successfully to corruption. Knowledge is power. You can only fight what you know. And without knowledge, it won't give us the flexibility to, to seek for accountability or to fight corruption. So that's the second one. And then there is also a responsibility to say no to corruption at the professional level. For instance, there are youth organizations all over the country in Nigeria and across the continent, for instance. Some of us use political figures. Some of these organizations, they use political figures as patrons, to get huge donations for their projects and all of that. So where do you think these guys get this money from? And I always say there is no such thing as government money. I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's your money. I mean, you empower the government through your taxes, excise duties and all of that. So if a politician or if someone in position of authority mismanages funds, so it's eventually will tell on the future of the economy. It eventually will tell on our future too, because it's your money. You get to pay more, and they will spend it anyhow. So we need to ask the right questions. Say no to corruption. I'm just going to make this joke. For you, for instance, as an influencer, what exactly are you influencing? Do you have a very cool job that brings in money for you, or you're just helping politicians launder money? So, I mean, we need to ask the right set of questions, embrace a value system that cherishes hard work and innovation, and then um, say no to corruption at the professional level as well. I mean, and there's also the place of knowledge, education, sensitization, and monitoring government expenditure. So youth need to arm themselves with knowledge on how government funds are being spent. They need to arm themselves with knowledge on what exactly these funds are used for. I mean, I follow through budget projects all year in, and I follow through their reports and all of that. How many of youth in Nigeria or African youth know how much is being spent on this and that every year? And I don't know, I may be wrong, but I've never seen uh, a lawmaker that was recalled from the parliament for mismanagement or for corruption. I've never seen that in Nigeria. I may be wrong, Joe, but I've never seen it. So, we need to take action as youths because there is so much power in this in our population, and of course Rinu can attest to that as well. We've seen that with um a couple of protests that has happened in Nigeria in the last few years, and it can always go on and on like that if we ask the right questions. We need to start holding these guys accountable. I'm very, very glad that the protests that happened in Nigeria yielded some results, and it still continue to yield some results because they now know that the youth in Nigeria cannot be toyed with, and we need to take hold of that and demand for change. I think I'm just gonna rest there for now.
Yeah, I really like that, and but my own apprehension has always been, we talk about this change and change and change, but it's really ambiguous from the perspective of the youth. For example, Reno, you understand that in the last election, Omoyele Sowore was a huge force. As a young person, he came in with a new perspective and whatnot. But in this election, the three leading candidates have been in politics for a long time. And two particularly among them have been like fighting dog and cat in the last 2 weeks about, oh, you corrupt, you have cases to hear, or you need to be arrested by EFCC. But really, can you help us identify what we as young people should be looking for in a proper candidate? Maybe you don't need to mention names, but what should define the candidate, the ideal candidate that we can trust as young people? Your microphone is muted.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing this. And I'm sorry I came late. I mean, I was trying to fix something on my system. So what should we as young people look forward to in candidates that we want to vote for? I think that's a tough one. But it's not so tough. I think that my co-guest here said a lot of things about what we need to look forward to. And he said something about, I think our stolen money. Do you understand what I'm saying? Whenever they say government money, they say politicians' money. They say, oh, it's the government, let them keep stealing it. You need to realize that it's your money. So as young people, one of the things you need to look at is that who among these candidates is going to guarantee me a better future? You see, many of us are having dreams, not even dreams any longer. It's the reality of many Nigerians that they're now in the UK, the US, Finland, name it any country. I was speaking to my professor, sorry to digress a bit, I was speaking to my professor, and he's not a Nigerian, he's from another country in Africa. And he said something intriguing. He said, one of the few tribes you'll find anywhere. If there was a country in Antarctica, you'll find Nigerians there. And everybody laughed, I laughed as a Nigerian as well. But then the blunt reality of this instance is that Nigerians are not just leaving their country for fun. Many of them are even escaping from the country. What am I trying to say? As a young person, who among these candidates is going to guarantee me a bright future? When I look at the candidates, when I look at their manifestos, when I look at their promises, their stance on several issues that are critical to me, what are they going to do when they get there? I mean, except we deceive ourselves, many of us already know that some of these candidates, they're not going to do anything when they get there. Many of them are already spouting the rhetorics of, I just want to go there. Yeah, it's my turn to go there. It's my turn to become president. Do you really think that in the 21st century, where young people are trying from different countries, are moving in invention, innovations, in technology, in development, do you really think that's the mindset that we Nigerians, out of this stage that we are now, we need in one of our, not even one of our, the leading position in the country, which is the presidential seats, Also, like I said, you look at their manifestos, look at their past records. Are these people, do their lives inspire education? Do their lives inspire achievements? I can go on and on, but then many people in the room would say, oh, maybe we know you are biased towards this person or that person. For a candidate where that hasn't even said anything about education, how are you sure that when he gets into that position, he's going to value our education as Nigerian young people? Many of our young people are spending 6 years, 7 years for 4 years course. As your candidate even mentioned anything about that? As your candidate mentioned anything about the digital world that we are in today and how they're going to improve or invest in the talent of young Nigerians, so that we can also be up to par with our Western counterpart out there? What is your candidate exactly saying that you can understand? I hope it's not incoherent statements that we're making TikToks and Instagram posts and Facebook posts all over. So these are the things that I feel at the very basic, before we even begin to go into policies and then go into all this ad stuff. At the base of it all, do you understand what your candidate wants to go and do? And also, before I just round up, I also think that one of the things that young people should also leave aside is the politics of ethnicity and religion. Am I voting for this person simply because it's from my tribe or for my religion? Or am I voting for this person because he has said he's going to do this and he can be held accountable? That's another part, and that's the part I'm going to round up with. Before you vote for a candidate, you need to ensure that that candidate can be held accountable. The government that we have today has shown themselves that they cannot be held accountable. And you can see that, my co-guest has talked about many protests that have been held in Nigeria, so many incidents we can refer to. So can these people actually be held accountable to their words? I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's really, really strong. And I really identify with what you said. And your mention of ethnicity or ethnic politics as a determiner of how people vote, it really reminds me of the recent development in the UK. And Femi, you live in the UK. Rishi Sunak was recently elected first Indian person of Indian descent to be able to be the prime minister. And a lot of young people identify with Rishi Sunak, not because it's Indian, not because it's not Muslim or it's because it's whatever, but because he's vibrant, he's young, his policies are so, there's so much resonating with the young people, as Rinu said. But in your case, Femi, as someone who lives in that country, why do you think it's so easy for young people that are white, that are Black, that are Asian to identify with somebody like Rishi Sunak? Why do you think that is the case, and how can we learn from that as Nigerians in concerning ethnicity that you mentioned?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just like to take cues from what Renu said, that it all boils down to, competence, character, and a track record of, leadership, fiscal prudence, and unlimited government. I mean, Rishi has served, he got into parliament at a very, very young age. He has only been a member of parliament for about 7 years before he became a prime minister. And so far, I think he's the second youngest seven prime minister in British history. And but we could all identify, and young people could all identify with him, even his party could identify with him because of his track record of competence, leadership, and fiscal prudence. He resigned from the government because of unaccountability, and before, and went back to the parliament before. Now he was elected. He was elected as the leader of the party. So yes, a simple answer to that question would be: it's very, very important that young people who are going to be the deciding factor in Nigeria's elections or in elections across the continent should go for a candidate or should queue behind a candidate with proven track record of competence, with proven track record of, of fiscal prudence. There is among the, let's take for Nigeria, for instance, now, among all the candidates we have, there's a candidate who has a tight grip of a particular state, right? There's a candidate who who has a track record of fiscal prudence, who live in office, does not have anything states, in his name, and as classic liberal that I am, I would go for someone, of course, someone who promotes limited government. I would go for someone who has a track record of fiscal prudence. I mean, the records are there that we can check for a particular candidate who served his time in office with no blemish of corruption. And there is a particular candidate with a questionable character, right? So I mean, the choice is ours, but I would go for a candidate with unquestionable character and a track record of excellence and prudence. So yeah, it all boils down to these factors, and what Nigerians or what African countries can pick up from Rishi being UK Prime Minister is there is no room for mediocrity in Western system that we see it. I mean, that we always see. There's no room for mediocrity. I mean, the records are clean and clear. If you have a blemish, they will fish you out. And that's before we started this webinar. That's one of what we're discussing, that the Conservative Party has had probably many more prime ministers than any country and all in the space of 10 years and all. And this is because, for whatever reason, if there is a stain on whoever is the prime minister or whoever is in position of authority, and it comes to the fore, you would be asked to resign, or honorably you would resign. So there is no room for wishy-washy or politics of corruption or blemish. Unlike in African countries, where you would have someone that that this person deep within your mind, and the records are clear that this person is terribly corrupt, and some of his records are he's found wanting with some of his records, and then we'll still go ahead and play politics as if it's normal. Over here, it's not like that. People with questionable character are asked to resign, or willingly they would be resigned. So the system will take it up with them. So there is no room for I know there would be. I mean, the system is the system anywhere, but it's pretty much same in other countries than in some other countries. And I would say that in African countries, it's still even terrible. It's more terrible because the system does not hold them accountable. And that's why every one of them could grow wings and even stay content. For instance, a particular candidate in Nigeria would not even near the polls at all with those questionable records. He would never near the polls with those questionable records. But here we are in Africa, the system is the system. It's the norm of the day and all of that. So we can queue behind Rishi Sunak as the young prime minister in Britain because he has a clear and he has a clear record of competence. He has a track record of competence, fiscal prudence, and very good leadership. And that's what African nations can take a cue from. Yeah.
You know, Femi, your comment reminds me of what I was reading yesterday. So my current research in my PhD program is about court cases in early colonial Lagos, 1880 to like 1920. And I was reading some legal proceedings in Abeokuta. And before you have the Alake or the King of Egba starts the proceeding, you will have to ask you to swear by the cutlass. I mean, these were written in English, that you have to swear by the cutlass. I know that's outrageous nowadays, but the same so-called British that, you know, switch us from swearing with the cutlass or whatever to swearing with the Bible, which anybody can just use now. But Rinu, I want to come to you. So you were an integral part of the End SARS protest that happened in 2020. And that was a huge turning point in Nigeria's modern history. I want to know, because many of the things we protested during End SARS were caused by the PDP. I have to mention the name, the PDP, for many, many years. Their lack of equitable reform of the police, and carried over by the APC for many, many, many years. And those were the things we were protesting. And of course, it relates to economic and whatever other issues. But I want to know, how do you think the End SARS moment can be utilized by young Nigerians to make change in these coming elections? In other words, what do you think is going to be the role of an awakening like the End SARS in this upcoming election?
Again, thank you very much for that question. I think that's very vital. I think that my co-guest said something, you know, just now. Olufemi said something. He said something about how, you know, I think people that were involved in the End SARS protest or in the protest, you know, are now, you know, championing or calling for change, especially when it comes to these elections. And that's where the role of End SARS comes in, you know, just like you rightly said, the past governments, including the current government that we have in Nigeria today, have actually contributed to the state of frustration, to the state of anger that young Nigerians have today. For me, I think that End SARS has actually done a lot. Many people will say, oh, End SARS did not record any wins and all of that. And I always like to correct them. One of the most important things that End SARS did for the Nigerian population or for the Nigerian youth was first to shatter this culture of deference, this culture of worshiping politicians in our politics. You know, for one of the few times in Nigeria, young Nigerians could look directly at politicians and say, so okay, do you understand? It's not something common in our politics. Yeah, our politics is used to glorifying or giving adorations to criminals who are actually stealing away our future. So I think that's one of the very first wins that End SARS has done for us, which is to shatter the culture of deference. Also, it also led to a political awakening. You cannot unlink the End SARS protests to the newfound energy and hope that young people are channeling towards the 2023 elections. You know, I think that's, I could take myself, I'll use myself as an example. Prior 2020, I don't think that I cared as much about Nigerians' election as I cared today. You know, my thoughts were, I'm gonna do as you want to, you know, get money and jackpot from this country, because this country, you know, they work, right? However, because of End SARS and the fact that young people manage to find their voices, we also managed to unify around a common cause. We also saw hope, and we are seeing hope as well, you know, to protesting in the 2023 elections. And this will not just be on the street, it will be very specifically at the polling units. Do you understand what I'm saying? So that's also one of the things End SARS did. Like I said, when people talk about End SARS win and they don't include the fact that End SARS gave us this transparency, you know, you had young people who were crowdfunding, who were mobilizing, who were doing a lot of things. And for the very first time in Nigeria, we were the change we sought. You know, young people became the change we sought. Things like medical bills, things like providing food on the ground, a lot of things that weren't working in Nigeria suddenly began to work, you know, and young people could see that it's not as if these things are hard. It's not as if these things are extraordinary. You know, if protesters could manage to mobilize themselves within some weeks to provide medical services for themselves, food and all of that, then why has this country not worked in the first place? I think another thing was that a new social contract was written. Like I said earlier, Nigerians, especially young people, many of them first-time voters. I have voted, I'm a second-time voter, but many of the us who participated in the protest were first-time voters. Created a new understanding about how leaders and public servants should relate to citizens. You know, it's not, like I said again, it's not a culture of making politicians gods. So there was I don't want to say there was a reinvention of governance in Nigeria. So, and then we woke up to a new politically conscious society, which you are seeing now. And that is also telling you that it will not be business as usual for the country political leaders. I dare say that these elections will actually chase out many politicians, many career politicians who have held on to the country political leaders. So, did you want to come in?
No, go ahead. We just, I think we have an intervention from.
Oh, no problem. That's actually fine. That's okay. So that's part of what I'm trying to say. And one thing, one especially how do I say this? One very particular point that answers your question is about the culture of transparency, you know, and accountability. Like I said, these were recipes of good governance. These were recipes of change that the End SARS people demonstrated in abundance. So, like I said, you could see people like the Feminist Coalition posting accounts of money they collected out, they were spending it and all of that. And this reflects in the 2023 elections, because if young Nigerians can manage to do these things for themselves, like I said, if they can manage to create this change for themselves, then why would our politicians not be able to do it? And so putting that mindset and going into the 2023 elections will be, if we can have a politician that would demonstrate this change that we demonstrated in 2020, then we're not going to vote for that person.
See, you brought up something that's I was just laughing at when End SARS happened and people were saying it's so uncultured for young people to go out and be, you know, causing all this havoc or, you know, causing all this problem. And they say, oh, that is not who we are. These young people are unruly. I just laugh because they don't know what history is. Yesterday, I was reading these two books, one by, these two are written by two of the first Black lawyers in Nigeria. One of them is called Eric Moore today. If you know Eric Moore in Lagos, that street is named after him. The second is by Ajayi Adeshafe. These are Black people. And towards the end of this was written in 1930, 1940. And towards the end of their books, they were talking about something called kirikiri and how that is often driven by the youth. So once a king is deemed to be corrupt or inept, the youth will protest and go and chase him out. That is what End SARS was. For people to say that is not part of our culture, that is bad, that is not, because they don't know the history of at least the Yoruba people, because this is something we've been doing before the British came around. And that brings me to my question to you, Femi. So we say, okay, as Rinu said, you know, we have to make the change. You already say you have to make the change and whatnot, but change is often used just very easily. And people have said perhaps the best way, apart from voting elections, the best way for young people to make change will be for them to actually get into public offices. I don't think you can identify any young person under the age of 30 or 35 in the National Assembly. If you can identify, maybe there will be very few. But look at other places like the UK, it's much more young people nowadays. So why do you think it's so hard for young people to get into elected positions in Africa, and more so Nigeria, Femi?
It's because you know, the system has disallowed it for so long, and I'll just allude to, you know, the last part of Rino's statement, that I was part of the End SARS protest, and it really exemplified everything that would have worked in the normal Nigeria. The spontaneity, the spontaneity with, how the whole thing was organized. There was no leader for the entire protest. There was no leader for the entire movement. Everyone from one state or the other was just, doing it. And because we're tired of the system, there was no central planning. There was nothing. People respond to do everything, and it was unplanned, devoid of government intervention and all of that. And that's everything that would make a system work in any country. Right. So your question on why don't we have more youth in political systems in Nigeria across the continent is because the system has disallowed this for so long, and I hope that from the cycle of elections in Africa this year, that youth are beginning to take charge, and hopefully with Nigeria's election this in less than a month from now, that we'll see a change. We'll see a change. The reason why it's so difficult is because the more we see the old folks there, the more young people are unwilling to go into the system because they know that they would not make it to the system. And also we also need to engage, do more of engaging young Africans in the decision making process. And then we need to invest in education and training of the young Africans as well, and on the political system, because not so many people are willing to get into the system and affect change, and because they believe that the system is so corrupt. They believe that, of course, it is. They believe that the system won't allow young people to take active role. So we need to take charge, and one of the ways we can take charge is by voting the right set of people into power and holding governments accountable. And it all boils down as well to individual value system as well. Individual value system. We should know that for us as individuals, we need to have the right values. We need to embrace the right values. We need to embrace making the right decision, making the right association, not queuing up behind politicians, not queuing up behind people with questionable power, and most importantly, not getting them to positions of authority. It's very, very important. But largely, I would say that why young people have not participated in the political process is because the system has disallowed it for so long. And it's because the system encourages young people in positions of power. And the system encourages old people in positions of power. Say for instance, right now, there are three front runners for the presidency in Nigeria. And I think the youngest of all is I don't want to mention any candidate, right, but we know the youngest of them all, right? And the older folks keep saying that the younger guys, they have no experience, they have no track record of success and all of that. And it's funny because there are young people who queue up behind these old folks as well, right? And there are young people who queue up behind these old folks. I see all the banters on Twitter and all. There are young people who queue up behind the old folks as well. And if we keep doing this, things are not going to ever change because the system keeps enabling old people to get into positions of authority. And it will be like that till Christ comes. So the first point of action, and I hope that Nigeria will get it right with this election, is vote out the old folks. People always say that age does not equate to competence, but sometimes it does, really. It does, because what you can use with age, I know some young guys that are young and stupid, I know, but what you can do with a young and energetic spirit, there is little or nothing you can do with a frail body, right? So it's very, very important that young people, you know, take part in the system, and most importantly, don't queue up behind people with questionable character, and get involved in the entire process and get themselves to positions of authority as well.
Right. So, Rino, do you agree with that submission that age seems to be a problem? That we should go with young people. Some people have said experience matters as well, but to you, what really matters? I think you're right.
Okay, sorry, I was trying to omit myself. Thank you very much. I agree very much with Olufemi, with everything that he has said. I just wanted to also add the sort of political corruption, which he has mentioned, and the violence that we have in our politics, especially when it comes to Nigerian politics. You know, he has mentioned the fact that the system does not enable young people in order to be able to thrive. Let's first look at the political corruption, for example, and the reason why young people are also seen as the politics has been dirty. You know, you have you have governors, former governors who were in prison because they embezzled some money, and then some few years later they have been put on essential pardon. You know, it set an example for we the followers and of course the youth that corruption never gets punished in Nigeria, and one way or the other, the rich or the elite are always going to get their way through. And so, because as a result of that, you know, when you go in there, it's a dirty game, and if you don't have skin in the game, you're never going to win. That's one. Let's go to the I saw a recent tweet about I think organizer, somebody, common man on the street being sentenced to death for stealing 57,000 naira, and it sparked a debate on Twitter. You know, I also commented that I'm not apologies for somebody stealing, but then let's look at our politicians who have been stealing billions and billions of naira, and then nothing ever happens to them. They always go scot-free with a pat on the back. Taking an example of one of the landmark cases, the one I mentioned of the former governors Daviye and you know the other one that was sentenced to prison, and then they were later pardoned on some flimsy excuses, you know. And a lot of people are also talking about how let me not even go into that, but then political corruption. That's the first thing. You know that this system is corrupt and is definitely going to end up you know, sucking you into the game. So why not just stay out? The other part is the violence that happens during in our elections. You know, over time in our elections, there's no single election that goes by that doesn't go by with some unknown gunmen, unknown men, you know, killing of some people, killing of some politicians. There's always a lot of chaos happening. I mean, recently, there was a woman leader that was killed in Kaduna State as well. And this is obviously politically motivated because she was killed and her husband was spared, you know. And we can go on and mention about how they are killing off our politicians are doing a game of do or die affair. It's not a game of do or die affair. I kill you or you kill me, and it's becoming a cat and rat game. Do you think that young people, probably like Olufemi or me, would want to put our foot into that kind of game where you can get killed just because you're not becoming a threat to the political establishment? It wouldn't want to happen. Also, when you look at the fact that our young people are disenfranchised in our political system, even if they're not politicians, our voices being heard in our lawmaking parliaments, in our lawmaking positions, everywhere, young people's voices are always shut down. I mean, was it not recently that our president, I think, was it last year or last year, that he said, these are the lazy youths that we have in Nigeria? You know, it might seem like a joke. Many of us may take it as a joke, but then it reflects of the way our leaders, you know, they see us as these noisemakers and these useless people. And that's why they don't give you room for voices. Even during the End SARS protest, the poor man thought that we were coming to take him out of Aso Rock. And so, you know, he inadvertently admitted, you know, to sending the soldiers to go and shoot at people because he said these guys want to come and commit, start something or something like that. You know, Olufemi also talked about how the frailty of these people that are in position doesn't allow them to perform, because many of them, the only thing that they are being told is by their SSSAs, whatever not, and they don't understand the reality that is on ground. So why do they want to give you an eye voices? Let's also look at the cost of elections, for example. These elections, we had $100,000, $150,000. I mean, you could go on and on about the ridiculous price of just getting a party nomination form in order to be able to contest. As a young person who is struggling, who is doing the hard work legitimately, do you think that I could afford $100,000 nomination form or $50,000? I mean, it's not possible. So the system, just like Olufemi said, the system is already rigged against young people. And I saw an article that I read recently say, not too young to run, but then too poor to run. So the system is rigged against us already, and there's no how young people are able to get a foot in this game, except one of the very, very good legitimate ways you can do that is to vote in good people at first, people who have our own interest at heart. And that's the only way we can get a foot in, because this system, as you see it, just like Olufemi said, is rigged against you. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yeah, you unearthed a lot of things that a lot of us cry silently about. Nigeria is the biggest fraud ever made, unfortunately. But Femi, because we are getting to the end of the conversation, maybe if you can in 1 minute help answer this question by Muyiwa, when he's asking about how can we bridge the gap between the young and the old. I mean, as Rinu established, we are struggling with money to buy these forms. It's been rigged against us. So obviously the elderly people have much more power than we do, but we also want a part of the conversation. So how do we bridge that gap? How do we liaise, if possible? Femi, if you can answer that in 1 minute. Please.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, there are so many ways to do that. And even if you're not, let's say an elected politician, and you don't get to hold position of power, I mean, there are so many other things you can also do to deal with, fiscal mismanagement and all. And as young people, we need to do more on engaging young people like us in decision-making process. And I mentioned it earlier as well. And then arm ourselves with knowledge, and taking action where possible to hold government accountable. And then we also need to invest in training young Africans as well in financial management, entrepreneurship, free market economies, and this would help build a new generation of leaders, who understand the principles of limited governments, fiscal accountability, and all of that. And then lastly, involving young Africans, involving young people in the process of public funds management would give us a sense of ownership, and responsibility to be proactive in ensuring that resources are well managed and all. But what I just want to mention to cap it all is, it may be a long way, to getting young people into positions of authority. But before then, it's still going to happen, and it may happen in a few years to come, and it may even happen with Nigeria's election this year. But even before it happens, we have a very, very good key role to play in ensuring that the system does not remain the same. Right? I was reading a story, a BBC investigation, which exposes how young influencers have secretly been paid by political parties to spread disinformation about opponents, right? And these are not old people, these are young people. I mean, now we are all clamoring for change and all. So young people in Nigeria right now, they're already polarized, right? There is a bunch of Nigerian youth who support a particular candidate and a bunch of Nigerian youth who support other candidates, right? So we're already polarized, and things are not going to work that way. So we need to take ourselves as one, and take actions where necessary. I mean, it's just as simple and important as that. I'm just going to stop there.
Right, Femi, thanks for that. I think we all saw that BBC investigation.
Yeah.
But if I may read this comment by Merits, the African youths, Merits Ayibe, they say the African youths need knowledge in key areas of political process, of governance, namely correct participation, holding political leaders accountable, ensure contribute to eliminating corruption at all levels and forms. Right to education is needed. Their socioeconomic well-being must be prioritized. And Rinu, maybe you can close us off with, okay, Arinze from the comment section is also talking about End SARS, and now we are not using that to crowdfund to support young people for places like House of Reps. So Rinu, you want to close us off in 1 minute because we're really out of time. What do you think we should be looking up to, or what we should be doing? It's just 29 days, to the polls. As young people, what should we have in mind the next 29 days?
Thank you very much. One of the first things we need to have in mind, especially as people who participated in the End SARS protest, is justice for End SARS victims. It has been established, that the Nigerian government actually sent soldiers to go and shoot at protesters, peaceful protesters at Lekki Toll Gate. And it's important to reiterate this, that it was not just at the Lekki Toll Gate. It was all over Lagos and all over Nigeria. Protesters were killed everywhere, not just in Lagos, but in Nigeria. So that should first be on the forefront and forerunner of our mind. Justice for End SARS victims. Police brutality reforms are also very, very important. Then we can now look at candidates who can solve our unemployment issues. Yes, we can train Africans, we can educate ourselves on policy issues, financial management issues, corruption issues, and all of that. But then everything still boils down to the role of the civil society. And you can see what civil society has been done to in African societies today. Civil societies are a shadow of themselves, because at the foremost of it all, you need to have good people in power. It is when you have good people in power then you can begin to talk of the role of the civil society, the role of young people. How can we then get young people to go into these positions and make them people who allow young people to come in, not the leaders of yesterday who are still coming back to say they want to be leaders of tomorrow. So when will the youth of today now become leaders of tomorrow? That's the first thing you need to do. Vote for people who will prioritize your issues. It's very, very important. Also, people who will not try to get away with stealing. We need to also reiterate that at times you don't call a spade when it comes to corruption and the issues that it has created in our countries, especially in African countries. You have corruption, which is the main bane of Nigeria, and it has led to our unemployment. It has led to the poverty of a lot of people. It has led to the undevelopment of Nigeria, because we have simply refused to deal with this issue of corruption. Even Mr. Corruption Crusader, who came and said he wanted to, end corruption, has also ended this tenure, with even more corruption. And like I said, at times you don't call a spade when it comes to corruption. We bring misappropriation, misapplication, embezzlement, diversion, conversion. Still free. And then young people need to understand that. Just like Olufemi said right from the start, it's not government money that is being stolen. It's your money that is being stolen. And whoever is stealing your money, vote them out. 21st century, you don't have light. Vote these people out. 21st century, you don't have jobs, you don't have good roads, and you, as a young Nigerian, you're on social media, you are seeing other nations advance in technology and innovation, and you still think that the politicians from the past, who are not even promising you anything, all they go to campaign grounds to do is to reel out incoherent words and dance and spew out ethnic bigotry, and that's all they do. Do you think those are the people that really want to advance your future? I mean, it's left to us, just like Olufemi said, as Nigerians, to choose what the path is going to be for us for the next 8 years. Would it be on the path to recovery, or would it be on the path to backwardness? So those are the issues for me. You need to put your own issues on the front burner. You already know we don't have jobs. Put that on the front burner. Police brutality is still an issue in the 21st century. Put that on the first burner. Like they'll say, oh, a lot of nations deal with police brutality, but do they deal with it on the sort of unprecedented scale that Nigeria is dealing with police brutality? No, you can't go to the US and somebody will say I should come and give him $1 because I'm simply driving a car. It's not possible. So those are the things that we need to look at. And when they say End SARS lost momentum, just to add in Arinze's question, End SARS did not actually lose momentum. The protests may have gone off the streets. The protests may have gone off the TV screens. May have even gone off newspapers. Doesn't mean that the End SARS protests are stopped. No matter how strong the will of protesters may be, with their placards and their flyers and their cardboards and their t-shirt and all of that, state repression will always manage to overcome that. And this is why that's why I said from the start that the next protest should be at the polling unit. So no matter how hard your placard and you're strong and you're so loud on the street and all of that, the sound of a gun or a bullet or seeing a fellow protester drop dead beside you can simply overcome that will and simply return you back to your homes. And so where is the next safest place for us to protest? That's at the polling units. Get your PVC and vote out the people who have simply led Nigeria up to this point today. Thank you.
Well, that's a strong note to close on. Thank you, Rinu. As you said, we have our PVCs and it's our option to choose who should be our next captain. So thank you, Femi, for taking the time, and thank you, Rinu, for your participation as well. And of course, big thanks to the audience for their engagement. It's been an engaging conversation. We hope this will be the beginning of change in Nigeria and the change in South Sudan, Comoros, Zimbabwe, and all the African countries having their elections in 2023. And on that note, I want to say thank you, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thanks for having us. Bye.